All right, still here at Fort Pulaski National Monument, and because it's such a pivotal part of U.S. military history, you have to understand this fort was besieged for about 30 hours by Union forces while it was in Confederate hands. Now, it was surrendered very early, even though it was thought to be, at the time, impregnable. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest military minds this country has ever produced, especially with defensive warfare, was Robert E. Lee, and he was one of the officers responsible for its initial planning operation. He surveyed the site. He wasn't the one who actually designed the fort, but I mean, it had extremely brilliant men who designed it, to the point where its original construction method in the 1830s has held up to the point where, even though it's built basically in the mud of the Savannah River, hasn't settled. There's not a crack in these bricks from foundation settlings. It's exceptionally well built, and it was thought at the time to be impregnable, but mind you, it was built in the 1830s. And prior to in between the War of 1812 and the American Civil War, artillery was predominantly smoothbore. As such, you build brick thick enough, not a problem. Well, rifled artillery came into play. Specifically, this piece behind me, not that exact one, that's a repro. We'll get into why and that piece tomorrow. But having said that, we're going to talk about why the fort was surrendered early. Right here in this corner of the fort is embrasures number 15, 14, and 13, respectively. Now, this area of the fort was breached by Union rifled artillery firing from Tybee Island. Now, what's the problem with this? If I execute an about face, that's the powder magazine. And it is in a dead straight line to that area. Inside that powder magazine was over 40,000 pounds of black powder. Now, the Union forces had been firing mostly solid shot, which is actually good. If they had fired exploding shells that had breached into that powder magazine, this fort would not be standing here today. Rounds penetrated through those casements, had multiple holes in them. One of them was, and I forget which casements, which one of them had about an 8-foot hole in it. One of them had about a 15-foot hole in it. One of them had about a 1-foot hole in it. Anyway, at some point during the firing, a round passed through one of those holes, landed in the passageway for that magazine back there. And at that point, Colonel Olmsted, the Confederate commander, chose to surrender the fort rather than losing the fort entirely. Now, solid shot reached its way back there repeatedly. You have to think about this. There's over 40,000 pounds of pressure contained in extremely thick walls. Most of the walls in this fort are 7.5 feet thick, 12 to 15 foot on the magazine itself. You got a lot of place to contain that powder. A deflagration inside that would have turned this place into an extremely powerful bomb. So had that been breached, wouldn't be standing here.